Greetings, Total War fans. My name is Anastasia, and I am Senior Community Manager on Total War here at Creative Assembly. Today, we're going to be talking all things Total War Empire, and I am joined today by amazing developers, Ellie, Scott, and Tim. Ellie, why don't you say a few words about yourself?
Hi, I'm Ellie. I work as the technical art director on Total War. When I was working on Empire, I was hired as a cinematic artist.
Awesome. Tim?
Yeah, hi, I'm Tim Gosling. I am an AI architect for Total War. I help develop the framework for building the AI across the Total War franchise's campaign layer for playing that. I was brought on for Empire as a programmer focusing on AI for the campaign.
Awesome, thank you. Scott?
Hi, I'm Scott. I'm currently the battle architect, which means I'm in charge of the technology from real-time battles across all of our titles. But back in the day of Empire, I was a gameplay programmer, having worked on Rome and working in the battle team.
Let's then start with probably one of the core questions. Why Empire? Why this setting?
I think from my perspective, like originally when I heard we were going to do Empire, I didn't really understand the setting. Like I thought, oh, isn't that kind of like boring Napoleonic reconstruction? But then the more we got into it, and I think, you know, watching things like Sharp and Hornblower, things like that, just really got the setting. And then by the end of it, I was like, actually, this is my favorite Total War setting that we've done, I think. I really kind of got it by the end, even though I don't think I did right at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I was hired and I didn't really have much context of the setting at the time. But from like a cinematic perspective, it was really fun for doing like dueling movies and stuff, and just the scope of like the entire world and what we covered, I think, in that time, and the just the range of different factions. It was just so much variety. It was really fun to work on. I learnt a lot working on that project as well.
Yeah, it was fun to work on. I mean, the scope is really very, very broad, and you know there were some really interesting elements coming out. I remember them pulling some of the like ship construction archives and having like massive tables full of all of the plans of the ships and things. It was like, okay, this is, you know, interesting historical stuff here. I mean, I don't know much about ships, but this was fascinating, and you know, we're trying to recreate this period, you know, as accurately as possible. That was pretty amazing seeing that happen, because, you know, first game I'd worked on, it was interesting to see that stuff happening.
I remember going down to Portsmouth and getting on the HMS Victory and you know, looking around the boats as well and sort of seeing the plans and the actual ships. And like you say, the scale was Total War was always a game about scale, but Empire, the scale was sort of the entire world, and it was kind of a very ambitious level of scale that was both, you know, to its what made it great, but also what made it incredibly challenging to work on.
No, it was a crazy amount of detail going on there, right? And yeah, I mean, people wanted to capture that. It's fascinating. And then gradually seeing it come together as you start seeing, like, you know, those ship models and things actually being turned into ships in the game, seeing them bobbing around in the water. That stuff was fascinating to see, and it was exciting. But yeah, interesting times.
I really want to see those ship schematics now. Like, so
they were huge as well. They were like the size of this sofa. You had to like roll them out. I'd actually forgotten about them until you just mentioned them, but they were just on a desk, weren't they? They were absolutely
massive.
massive.
They were massive. They were like,
I don't know where we'd even got those. From like the British Museum.
Yeah, we've gone to some archive somewhere and actually pulled copies of the original plans, or copies of the plans, something like that. It was pretty nuts. But it's interesting where the realism collides with real life as well, because a lot of, like, with the ship stuff, then people want to play with the ships. It's cool, but ships are complicated, right? They're difficult. It's like, how do you simplify that, but then also keep it looking and feeling right? That's hard.
I was actually watching a video of the naval battles yesterday, having not looked at them for a long time, and was really surprised by how much they stand up, and like having the level of detail that we added there, I think was kind of unprecedented. The fact that even within the ships, the men are properly responsible for loading the cannons and firing them, and the cannonballs are, blowing the sails as they go through them. There's kind of Verlet physics animating the sails, and I remember it caused a huge problem to the designers because every ship was physically modelled in the sea as it bobbed up and down, and there were panels physically modelled in the ship where if the cannonballs hit, they would do damage to them. But as the ships moved like this, you'd hit every time you fired. It was sort of luck or timing exactly which panel you hit. So you might hit a different panel every time and never do enough damage to penetrate. And the designers were just like, how do I balance this? I don't understand. Because we just sort of just built a simulation essentially. But there you go, you can make a game out of it now.
It's interesting where we go into maybe quite a lot of detail. I mean, the campaign map was obviously very, very big, but if you look from the transition from like Rome to Empire, so Rome was all, it was all grid based, and then Empire was all sort of vector based on the campaign map. The effective resolution was something like 30 centimeters across the planet, which was sort of, not sure we really needed that. We had it though. Yeah. If you wanted to pinpoint something very, very accurately, you could do that. That caused interesting issues.
That's quite impressive though, I must admit. I cannot even start imagining how can that work. That's very interesting, and also leads to my next question, because you did kind of already dipped into working back at that time, and for example, going to a museum and uncovering copies of ship schematics. How was it working back around that time on Empire at Creative Assembly?
Pretty intense at times, right? I mean, it was a much smaller team back then. Creative Assembly's obviously grown a lot. Everyone knew each other, but the space and that was a lot smaller. But it's quite intense. Good camaraderie though, right? People got on and did things well. It was very effective. But yeah, it was busy. It got pretty intense at times. Certain amount of overtime had at different points. I went through a lot of laptop bags. I was working on the train back and forth because I was commuting from London, and working on the train each day. But laptops back then, much bigger and now, quite heavy. Be running up and down an escalator, that bag will snap. I got through a lot of bags. It sounded ridiculous, but it's like
that sounds like a lot of workout as well.
Good exercise, right? Good exercise, but busy times.
And I just remember, obviously, as Tim says, we're a lot smaller. The scale was much smaller than it is now. And when I think I spoke before about Rome, where we didn't really have any designers, we did start having designers in Empire, but a lot of designers were actually more focused on history. They were reading these history books, these Osprey history books, where various units from history were detailed and what uniforms they wore and how they fought. And that was kind of their design. It was like, so they'd say, we want this unit of dragoons and they can get off their horses. And like, okay, well, how does that work from a gameplay perspective? In those times, that wasn't the focus. That was sort of the focus was on us to solve a lot of those problems, because they were sort of really doing the world building and deciding what that was, and we were kind of deciding what the game was almost, which was, I really loved that, and I think that sort of stayed with me ever since. But there was a lot of that where it'd just be like, this is how it worked in history, there you go, that's what we want. Okay, how do we make a game out of that? And that's very different now. Like now, we will think much more about the design early on and the gameplay early on. In those days, we kind of constructed, like I said about the naval battles, we constructed a simulation and we sort of saw where the gameplay was after the fact. And sometimes that worked really well, and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it was like, yeah, it's well simulated, but it's not fun. And then we've got to add the fun back in, or somehow make it fun, or like sort of guide the simulation in some way to make it more balanceable. Now I think we do that ahead of time. We think about those things before we get to them, because these things are expensive. You spend 6 months to make a simulation, and then you're like, no, that's not very fun. And I remember with the sailing, the first thing we did was we actually made it work like a sailing boat. So you couldn't sail into the wind, and you had to tack like a sailing boat, which means if you want to sail in the direction the wind's coming from, you have to go diagonally, sort of left and right to go in that direction. The players had no understanding of that, so you click to go over there and you're like, why is my ship going off over here? And it's like, well, that's what a sailing ship would do. And so those things, we kind of come to them, we're like, yep, that might have made sense, physically or historically, but it's not what works for the player. So, we had to kind of compromise some of those things.
I think from an art perspective, because the team was smaller, there was a lot of overlap of the things you do on a daily basis. There was less specialism. You'd be sort of pulled into very different areas to work on things. So as a cinematic artist, I was obviously working on some of the dueling movies for that project. But then, we ended up being also directors for motion capture shoots, and we'd be in the suits doing the motion capture. And I think actually some people in this room might have also been doing the motion capture at some point. We'd be trying to recreate this historical feeling, and we'd look back at some of the footage we'd done for some of this dueling stuff and be like, it doesn't look realistic. We need some professionals, and we'd be shooting it in schools in the holidays and in the sports halls, because we didn't have a proper department or set up for that kind of stuff. So we just sort of made things work and just tried stuff out, and it was great fun to just sort of experiment that as a first project as well.
And from a coding perspective, I think we sort of we either knew every line of code, or we knew the person who knew that line of code, and they would sit within a few seats of us and we could ask them about it. Whereas now, there's so many more programmers involved in building our tech that to answer a question, whereas I might have either known the answer myself or asked the person next to me, I might now have to ask 3 or 4 people and sort of build the answer up over multiple kind of conversations because of the scope and scale of our code base and our tech. Whereas then our teams were so much smaller that you sort of knew how everything worked. Everything was a little bit simpler and a little bit easier to fit into your head in one time.
Yeah, I think in a way you had more latitude, more responsibility for what you were doing in a way. I mean, you don't have responsibility now, but it's as a smaller team, as you say, everyone knows each line of code, who everyone is. It's like, well, I have to get on and do a thing, and a bit like Ellie says, your scope is sort of get the job done. I mean, I was very lucky in the sense that I was brought on specifically to do AI stuff, which I think was more or less at first at the company. It had been a sort of something people were doing more on the side. So I was given quite a lot of latitude to go write an AI for this new title, which was quite a lot of responsibility given I'd not done that before. But the organisation trusted me to do it, so I went and did it. Hopefully people enjoyed it.
I remember it was like, please write an AI for this game that we haven't finished yet,
yeah.
And we don't really know exactly what it is. And you'd be like building the AI, but we're not doing that anymore. Like now the campaign's going to work like this. And you'd be like, but the whole AI is built for this, this last discussion we had, and things were changing so rapidly because, what the game was still kind of cementing, whilst you're trying to write an AI to play one game, and we're making another game without you realizing.
Total War Empire used the revamped engine. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, I think we got to the point where the engine we'd used for Rome Total War and the expansions was really not showing its age, but there were restrictions in it that made it hard to do things. And I think we felt that we'd learnt a lot, and we'd sort of grown as an engineering team, and we understood the problem domain really well. We'd made like several Total War games. Like now we can make the Total War engine to end all engines. And like I said, it's like we did a lot of things better. But we made a whole bunch of new mistakes as well, and we were trying to build an engine, whereas previously I think we were just building a game. We were trying to build something that would last longer.
Yeah, I think I was coming in very junior on the team, but the process I was told really, right, is essentially that CA had built a new engine for every other game up to that point. The idea was now to build a new engine for Total War going forward, where you could replace bits of it modularly, right? So that you could swap out the campaign or the battle or parts of the battle much more easily. So instead of having to rebuild every time, you could rebuild bits of it and then keep what was still good. So that would allow much more effective incremental growth. And instead of having to do a complete rewrite every time, you'd just rewrite the bits you needed to, but you'd still have a good stable foundation to work from.
And that's certainly happened. I mean, we have sort of probably replaced every element of it, but we have sort of, it's been there all the time, having bits taken out of it and new bits plugged in, but we've still been able to play the game in it. And that's always been really important. Beyond that point was being able to always play the game and try things out. So we might say, we really need a new pathfinding system. Well, we've got the old one, let's write another one and sort of swap them over, but we've still got the framework of the game to be trying these things out in. The thing we learned, I think, with Empire was when you start from scratch, it takes such a long time to get to the point where you can even play the most simple game, the most simple campaign, most simple battle. And we never wanted to, I think post that point we're like, we don't necessarily want to do that again, because you just spend such a lot of time just getting back to where you were. And then you find out all the things, the nice things that are in the previous engine that you're like, oh, we haven't done that anymore, or that bit that you used to do was quite nice, we haven't done that. And it would take a long time to get all that stuff back in and working in the kind of the new framework. So I think, but at that point we decided, a full rewrite is generally not what we want to do. We want to be able to pull things out that need replacing and replace them with the new thing. We always want to know a roadmap of where we're going and how we want the technology to change over time. But throwing everything away and starting again is just too time consuming, and it just takes too long to get to the point where you can do something again and start looking at things. So I think that was a lesson learned there, that we haven't started completely from scratch again since that point. I would say every part of it has probably been replaced now, or at least modified, but we've never sort of started from a blank slate again since Empire.
And actually from like art design perspective, that means, when we're starting anything new or trying out anything new, it was much faster to be able to say, let's try this stuff out. We had a engine that was, fairly stable at that point, and we could just prototype things instead of having to wait again for some of these things to be rewritten. So from that kind of perspective, you could play test things, you could try things out. It was much faster then to kind of see where your product was going and then where those features were going, rather than starting from a point of nothing again. So
and I think the engine, the new engine was necessary to try and meet the ambition of Empire as a game. I don't think you could really have built that on the previous tech. So it was going to be necessary to rewrite to support that level of ambition, that sort of scope. So if you're gonna have to do it, try and build that infrastructure that gets you ready for longer term. I think that's the thing we needed to do, and that's what we did.
I believe the modular approach also helps with creativity, so you can try out new things. As you just mentioned, you can then have your ambitions and try also a much bigger scope, and you don't need to spend as much time to do essentially a lot of the same things.
Yeah, and the scope, like Tim was saying, was immense. And originally we wanted to model the entire world, and we sort of decided that maybe that wasn't the we literally couldn't do that and make it from a technological perspective, but also from a gameplay perspective. How do you make every single part of the world interesting and fun to play? And that's how we moved to this system of trade regions. I think you were going to talk about that.
Originally, I think as Scott said, the idea was to just model everywhere entirely, and that was a wonderful ambition, but that's a lot. That is a lot. I mean, it was a lot to do what we did, and there was a point where the team realised it wasn't really possible to do that. I mean, at some point, ambition has to match reality, and it was like, okay, well, how do we cut this down and still make it interesting and still give the feeling that the whole world is there? And so things like the kind of the trade theatres, and the idea you could fling your ships across the map and they'd appear somewhere else, and you're not quite sure where they'd end up. that kept the world big and interesting, and we captured a lot of it, but obviously not everywhere. And but the balance was struck, and hopefully we got that about right.
But I think that arguably was a really good move for the gameplay. Like I really enjoyed the way those theatres worked, and sending my ships down to the West Indies and sitting on like the Spanish trade route or whatever, and then or being attacked by pirates and all these things where it's like, this is out of the scope of my normal campaign, and I've got this like other campaign that's going on that I'm sort of almost like a little mini game, and I think it actually worked really well.
Yeah, I think the team came up with a good compromise there, and you say it added to the gameplay, it added that slightly different element that, if you're fighting a lot of land campaign stuff, having this other whole, well, literally theatre where you can do a different sort of thing was interesting. That made it fun.
I think actually Empire was the game I got to play the most, because I mean we were at the end of the cycle of development. We'd have some time we would all be testing it, right? We would all be playing it, so I think that's why we remember it so fondly. That those features were really fun.
Total War Empire is set in 18th century, making it one of the most modern Total War titles. What were the challenges and opportunities working on this game?
I think from a battle perspective, gunpowder changed everything. So I'm sure it did in terms of historical warfare, but just from a technological perspective, it was opened up a whole load of new challenges. So we're always used to dealing with projectile weapons with a kind of curved trajectory, and that helps out a lot with line of sight, because we model everything and we simulate everything in the battle. So every single projectile in the world in Total War is flying through the air. It's not just a kind of a hit detection and yes, we hurt that person. Every projectile is modeled. Now when you're firing an arrow, you've got a nice big arc, you can get over the top of scenery. When you're firing a gun, it's completely flat trajectory. And what that means is that like the height of a man, it's fired from where his gun is. And it's very likely that when you've got a flat trajectory, your shot is going to be obscured by a little bit of scenery. And that's very hard to understand when the camera's up here and you're looking down at a unit here and you're like, why is my unit not firing? And it's like, well, if you zoom down to the level of your man's rifle, you'd see that he's obscured. And it's like, well, that's not how players necessarily think, or they'd have to learn that, So that gave us a lot of challenge to how we do that. And I remember we also tried to model things like the firing drills that the very formed line infantry would use, things like rank fire, where you'd fire and then kneel down and the row behind would fire, and they'd look really ordered and really cool and synchronized. But we found that actually those in the simulation played a lot worse than a unit that's just constantly firing as fast as it can. So we had to spend quite a lot of time sort of skewing the balance to make these things actually work well. And same with firing from buildings. I remember we had, obviously a building's supposed to give you loads of protection, and we'd have the guys smashing the windows out and using the windows to fire through. But we also had code for the guys at the bottom that were aiming up at the windows. And we found that as soon as the guy would get to the window, the guy on the ground just shoots him and kills him. And it was like, well, now the buildings are way less effective because they've got 15 windows versus 100 men firing. How do we make this balanceable? That's the exact opposite of the outcome that we wanted. And so how do we make our simulation sort of model gameplay that we want, which is being in a building gives you, good protection and good fire output. So gunpowder was definitely a problem.
I think, but it was also quite atmospheric as well, because you remember all the the smoke effects going off on battle. And I remember from cinematics shooting some of the battles. This is fantastic, you get all this depth with all the smoke, and it was really really nice moments. I think
it hung around for ages. That smoke, it just was there, and the whole as lines were firing, the whole battlefield was smoking. You could barely see anything.
Yeah,
it was really cool.
Yeah, I seem to remember it caused problems with things like range and that when we had all the cannons and stuff like that, right? Because actual battle ranges were quite long, relatively. So coming back to the whole, how do you make it fun but also realistic? You have to kind of contract the range a bit, because otherwise it doesn't. Not so fun if it was they're over and we're just kind of shooting cannons over and it's okay, so actually we have to kind of contract things a bit to make it more game-like, but also retain the simulation. So you say you want the simulation to keep it as real as possible, but at the same time, still got to make it fun.
The thing it's a constant challenge in Total War generally is like we're trying to make games that are faithful to history, but in reality being in a war is probably not a great deal of fun, and we're trying to make this a fun experience and an experience that can take place in a reasonable period of time. And so that's constantly a trade-off that we're making between paying homage to history, but also at the end of the day it has to be a fun experience, and that's the kind of questions we're talking about on a daily basis, is how we strike that balance, because it's not always easy. And as I say, with Empire, our first point, and often is still our first point, is like we build it how it would be, and then we look at it and then we're like, right, how do we make this fun?
From the context of your discipline, what were the challenges and what were the most rewarding moments from working on this project?
Challenges, the scope is just very, very big. So from an AI perspective, you're having to manage a lot of things. How do you keep that working in a way that's reasonably performant and plays it reasonably effectively? And you can get some sort of fun but daft moments. So, I mean, this is Empire, like Total War, but at one point when we had the diplomacy up and running, the AI would happily negotiate amongst itself and then just decide, no, this is fine, this is good, we're good now, this is how we'd like things. At which point the joke was, it's become Empire total negotiated settlement. Everyone's just happy. That's great. I'm glad the AI's done that. It's done its job, but not actually what we were after.
I think the level of detail that we went to was a whole nother level on the battles, like having artillery where we properly modelled how that artillery is loaded. So, one guy is there poking the kind of gunpowder down the barrel, another guy's there putting the cannonball in, and then the guy lights the fuse, and the cannon fires. Great, it looks really cool. So what happens if the guy with holding the what looks like a big cotton wool bud, I'm sure it's got a proper historical name, that sticks a thing down the cannon, what happens if he gets shot halfway through and so I have to pick that thing up, and then when we, as I said, we put these same things in the when the cannons fire in the ships, exactly the same thing's happening. There's guys loading that cannon exactly as that cannon would have been loaded, and I think that's what caused the challenge and what created the spectacle. It's like, because we could have not done that stuff and it would have been a lot easier, and we probably would have had less issues because of that. But then when you go back and look at it, and probably how it was, because at the time it just felt like a massive pain, like, why are we going to this level of detail? It's kind of nuts. But looking back on it now, I can see that quality that created that wouldn't have existed otherwise. And seeing, like you're in your naval battle, you fire a round shot at a ship, blast off the panel, and see the guys inside actually loading the cannon to return fire. Or you have a building, and you can look through the window and you can see the entities actually in there fighting one another. That stuff which seemed nuts at the time and made it very difficult to make, now I'm not involved in actually having to finish it and dedicate my life to making it. I can drink that in and go, yeah, that was worth it and it was cool.
I think from the art perspective, there's always the level of detail that artists want to put in at the end of a project. Get to a point where you're like, okay, we have to stop now. And obviously, usually it's production, it's like, no more. And I remember even the challenges at the end. I think possibly it was the battle design, and I think and how settlements were, that we were still kind of to the wire a little bit, still trying to figure out and make it fun. And from the artist's perspective, we were working on all these battle maps. We didn't have any sort of terrain tooling at the time. We built all our own tools for sort of later games, but at that time we were just working in 3D Studio Max and placing these things by hand. And when we got to come and change those designs, artists had to go back in and manually change everything. So that was a really big challenge. I remember the end of Empire, just the manual sort of iteration of things. And obviously we've learnt to sort of reduce that kind of iteration time at the end to make that more efficient. But it was a big learning curve, I think, for the art teams and stuff.
Speaking of the art, I remember the star forts. Do you remember those?
Oh, yeah.
And they were these big sort of pre-Napoleonic, I guess, settlements that were kind of shaped like stars so they could focus fire. And they were quite an awkward shape. And so we ended up just modeling them as one big thing. Normally we would build a settlement out of small modular parts, but we just ended up modeling this thing as like, here you go, here's a star fort, and it had already been built. And then we're like, okay, how are we going to make it work? Like, this bit's too narrow, or this wall needs to change. Like, no, that's how it is. Like, no, just changing that is going to be a huge amount of work. So like, okay, right, well, we're just going to get this working. And I remember, like, how do we scale these walls? And then I remember we had this, like, we just get the guys to throw grappling hooks up. And any other game, I think, would just have an animation of someone throwing a grappling hook up. We actually had physically modeled rope. So as the grappling hook went up, we had like a Verlet simulation, like animating the rope, and as they pulled it tight, and all this stuff where, you wouldn't, if you suggested that you were going to do that now, and you told someone how long that would take, you probably would get a funny look. But then it's just like, well, that's just what we did. And but yeah, I just remember we'd just get these things and be like, it was almost impossible to iterate on it. So it's like, okay, we'll just make that work.
Finally, what do you think is the legacy of Total War Empire?
I think it set a precedent for us in terms of scope and complexity and detail that you can't really go back on. We set a line in stone, and that set an expectation that people sort of expect with Total War. That detail that people are expecting to see has to be there, and I think that's what Empire set was like. This is what it can be like. This is what a Total War game can be. It can be this huge scope of where you can, pretty much conquer the world. And I think that's always there for every future Total War game to live up to.
Once we got to a point we released this game on this engine, it was just, then it was like the creative imagination had opened up. Like, I remember the leadership was like talking about, we could do this game next, so we could do this game next. It just opened the doors for all the kind of different eras and things we could do because of what had been built with that game and how we could sort of evolve over time. I think it was a real creative, I think, just eye-opener for me as an artist. We go, okay, this is something I want to hang around for. We could be doing all sorts in the future, and we've done quite a lot.
I remember this amazing review that Mike Simpson put on his wall, and it was the most ridiculous, hyperbolic kind of statement about that undoubtedly the finest strategy game of all time. And it's like, I'm paraphrasing it and getting it a bit wrong, but it was just ridiculously positive, and we're just like, yes, that's it, that's what we wanted.
And that's all for today. Big thank you to our guests, Ellie, Scott, and Tim, and massive thank you to everyone who's watching it right now at home. Next time we will be back with Total War 3 Kingdoms, and if you don't want to miss it, go hit the subscribe button and hit that notification bell. In the meantime, go to the comment section and leave us a message. Tell us about your favorite moments from Total War Empire. And have a great day. See you soon.